The late afternoon sun in Brooksville was the color of weak tea, filtering through the dusty window of Maggie's diner and painting everything in a tired, yellow light. Detective Vince Crowe sat in his idling cruiser across the street, his thick fingers tapping a slow, impatient rhythm on the steering wheel. He was a big man, built like a retired linebacker, with a face that had settled permanently into a frown. Brooksville was his town, a place where the factory smokestacks had gone cold years ago, and hope seemed to have left with the last shift. His eyes, small and constantly moving, scanned the street. They landed on an older blue sedan pulling into the diner's lot. It was clean but unremarkable. The driver's door opened, and a woman got out. She was dressed simply a gray hoodie, dark jeans. She had her back to him, but he took in the scene with the quick, lazy judgment he'd owned over 20 years on the force. The car, the clothes, the way she kept her head slightly down as she pushed through the diner's glass door. He made his assumptions instantly. He'd seen it 100 times. New arrival. Probably just passing through, or maybe looking for under-the-table work at one of the dyeing plants. He filed her away in a mental category, a label that made her less of a person and more of a type. An easy marked dot inside the diner, the air smelled of old grease and strong coffee. The woman, Elena, took a booth at the back, near the window. She placed her simple backpack on the cracked vinyl seat and slid in. Maggie, the owner, gave her a nod from behind the counter, and Elena returned it with a small, tired smile. She ordered a black coffee, and when it came, she wrapped her hands around the warm mug, staring into its dark surface, as if it held some secret dot to anyone looking. She seemed weary, maybe a little sad. And she was. But it was a specific kind of weariness. The files she pulled up on her tablet weren't vacation plans or social media. They were case files, dense with text and evidence photos. She was on leave, but her mind couldn't stop working. It was the only thing that kept the roaring silence of her grief at bay. Her husband, a man whose laugh used to fill their home, was gone, killed in the line of duty. This trip, this drive through small towns, was supposed to be a break, a way to remember him without the four walls of their empty house screaming his absence. Brooksville was just another dot on the map. Across the room, Vince Crowe finally decided to move. He heaved himself out of the cruiser, adjusted his belt under the swell of his stomach, and strode across the street. The little bell above the diner door jingled with a sound he found annoyingly cheerful. He didn't bother with a greeting. He just walked straight to Elena's booth and slid in opposite her, the bench groaning under his weight. He dropped his heavy forearms on the table, making the coffee cup tremble. "Afternoon," he said, his voice a low rumble. He didn't smile. He flipped open a worn leather wallet, flashing his gold detective's badge. It was a practiced move, meant to intimidate. Detective Crowe, Brooksville PD. Elena looked up from her tablet. Her eyes, a deep brown, met his. There was no jump of surprise, no nervous flicker, just a slow, assessing look. She said nothing, waiting. Her calmness irked him. It wasn't the reaction he was used to. "See, we like to welcome new faces to Brooksville," he continued, leaning forward a little. "But we also like to make sure everyone's contributing, keeping things orderly. There's a local business tax for newcomers. Helps with community integration." His words were a bland script, covering something ugly. He was watching her face, looking for the fear, the confusion, the hurried fumbling for a wallet. Elena slowly put her tablet to sleep. "A local business tax," she repeated, her voice quiet and even. Her English was perfect, unaccented, and carried a quiet precision that didn't match the picture he'd painted in his head. "I'm not running a business, detective. I'm just having coffee." Crowe's frown deepened. Her tone, her lack of immediate compliance, felt like a challenge. "It's for services," he said, his voice hardening. "Police protection. You're using our roads, our town. It's $500, cash." "I have a receipt for the coffee," Elena said, her gaze steady. "That's my contribution for using the table. If you have an official town ordinance about this tax, I'd like to see it. Or a receipt book for the police department." A hot flush of anger crept up Crow's neck. No one talked to him like this, especially not someone like her, in his town, in his diner. "You think this is a game?" he hissed, his voice dropping so Maggie at the counter couldn't hear. "I'm not asking. This is how it works here. You pay, and you don't have any problems. You don't pay." He let the threat hang in the air. He reached across and grabbed her wrist, his grip tight. "You come with me." Elena didn't struggle. She looked down at his hand on her arm, and back up at his face. Her expression was unreadable, a mask of cool observation. She saw the bullying, the entitlement, the corruption worn smooth by habit. She saw a man who was used to winning every small, ugly battle. He pulled her to her feet, more roughly than necessary, and guided her toward the door. Maggie watched with worried eyes, but said nothing. Everyone in Brooksville knew better than to cross. Vince Crow. The parking lot was now bathed in the long shadows of early evening. The air had grown cool. Crow marched her over to her blue sedan, giving her a shove so her back was against the driver's side door. "Last chance," he growled, his face close to hers. He could smell the coffee on her breath. "500, now, or your visit to Brooksville is going to get very complicated. Maybe I find something in your car. Maybe your paperwork isn't in order. You understand?" Elena looked past him for a second, at the quiet street, at his cruiser. She was calculating, but to Crow, it looked like hesitation, maybe fear. "Good. I need my phone," she said quietly. "It's in my pocket." To call someone for the money. It was a lie, but a believable one. Crow nodded, a smug satisfaction settling on his features. He'd broken her. She was going to pay. But as her hand moved toward her hoodie pocket, a lifetime of training, of walking into dangerous situations, sent a different signal to his paranoid brain. Asterisk, what if it's not a phone? The thought was lightning fast and irrational, fueled by her earlier calmness. Slow. He barked, and in one fluid, panic-driven motion, he drew his service weapon from his hip holster. The sound of the slide was loud in the quiet lot. He didn't point it at the sky or the ground. In a terrible, decisive act, he leveled the barrel at the center of her chest. The dark eye of the gun was less than 3 feet from her. The world seemed to narrow for Elena. The greasy smell of the diner vanished. The sound of a distant dog barking faded. There was only the metallic glint of the weapon, the tense red face of the man holding it, and the cold, clear reality of the moment. Her own grief, her personal pain, was shoved into a locked box in her mind. The woman on leave was gone. In her place was someone else entirely. Crow saw the change instantly. The slight slump in her shoulders straightened. The tiredness in her eyes vanished, replaced by a focus so sharp it was like a physical force. She didn't flinch. She didn't put her hands up. She just went perfectly still, her eyes locking onto his. It wasn't the frozen fear of a victim. It was the utter, calm stillness of a predator. It was the look of someone who had seen guns pointed before, and it was the look of someone who was no longer seeing a detective, but a subject, a target. He opened his mouth to repeat his demand, but the words died in his throat. Her stillness was more terrifying than any scream. Just then, the radio clipped to his shoulder erupted in a burst of static and frantic voice. Asterisk all units, all units. Respond to the county courthouse immediately. Shots reported, federal officers on scene. This is a priority one. Asterisk. The voice crackled through the tense silence, a jarring intrusion from another world. Crow's eyes widened, flickering for a split second from Elena's face to his radio. The spell was broken, but the echo of it vibrated in the air between them. He lowered the gun, just an inch, his mind scrambling. The courthouse? Federal officers? This was big. This was the kind of chaos that demanded every cop in a 50-mile radius. He took a stumbling step back, holstering his weapon with clumsy hands. He pointed a shaking finger at her, trying to reclaim his authority, but the menace was gone, replaced by a shaky bluster. "This isn't over," he snarled. "You stay right here. I'll find you." He turned and practically ran to his cruiser, yanking the door open and peeling out of the lot, sirens wailing to life. Elena remained against her car, not moving. She took one long, slow breath, then another, letting the adrenaline settle, letting the professional persona recede just enough. She watched the cruiser disappear, its lights flashing against the brick buildings. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. Not to call for money. She opened a simple notes app and typed with steady fingers, *Brooksville, PD, Detective Vince Crow, badge number 1874, patrol car, #23, attempted armed extortion and assault. Initiate background and financials. Flag for federal review. *, she saved the note. The quiet, grieving woman was gone for now. The senior FBI agent had just opened a new file. Detective Crow's cruiser screamed through the quiet streets of Brooksville, the sirens echoing off the shuttered storefronts. His heart was hammering against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat that had nothing to do with the emergency call. One hand was tight on the wheel, the other kept drifting to his holster, as if to confirm the terrible thing he had just done. The image of the woman's eyes, that shift from tiredness to icy stillness, played over and over in his head. He tried to push it down, bury it under the urgency of the moment. Focus on the job, he told himself. The courthouse. When he arrived, the scene was chaos, but a controlled kind of chaos. The county courthouse, a grand old stone building, was swarming with people, but they weren't local cops or paramedics. They were federal agents. He saw their windbreakers, dark blue with big, bold yellow letters, FBI. They moved with a purpose and an authority that made the Brooksville deputies, huddled near their cars. Looked like boys playing dress-up. Crow got out, his badge held up. Detective Crow, Brooksville PD. He announced, trying to sound like he belonged. A young agent with a clipboard barely glanced at him. "Perimeter is secured, Detective. Stand by with your local units." Crow felt a flush of anger at the dismissal, but he swallowed it. He joined his fellow officers, who were buzzing with nervous speculation. "What's going on?" Crow asked the deputy next to him, a man he knew liked gossip. "It's huge," the deputy whispered, his eyes wide. Feds came in like a thunderclap. They arrested Commissioner Davies. Crow's blood ran cold. Commissioner Davies, the most powerful man in the county. A man who played golf with the police chief. A man who had, on several occasions, passed envelopes of cash to Crow in the parking lot of the country club, payments for looking the other way on certain business inspections. "What for?" Crow asked, his voice tighter than he intended. "Everything, from what I hear. Bribery, fraud, racketeering, the whole 9 yards. They've been building a case for months." The deputy shook his head in awe. "They say the lead agent is some big shot from Washington. Took him down right in his office." Just then, the main doors of the courthouse opened. A group of agents emerged, escorting a handcuffed and ashen-faced Commissioner Davies. Reporters who had materialized from nowhere shouted questions, cameras flashing. Crow's eyes scanned the group, looking for this big-shot agent, and then he saw her dot. It was like being kicked in the stomach. The air left his lungs. She walked behind the commissioner, not in a windbreaker, but in a dark, tailored pantsuit. Her hair, which had been tucked into her hoodie, was now pulled back in a severe, professional knot. She was speaking quietly to another agent, her expression focused and commanding. But it was her, the woman from the diner, the one he had shoved against a car, the one he had pointed his service weapon at. Dot. The deputy nudged him, pointing. That's her. That's the one running the show. Assistant director something or other. Cortez, I think. The name hit Crow's ears, but his brain was screaming too loud to hear it properly. Assistant director. The words echoed, meaningless and terrifying. He watched, frozen, as she paused, surveying the scene. Her gaze swept over the crowd of local officers. For one heartbeat, her eyes passed over his. There was no recognition, no flash of anger. It was a look of complete, impersonal assessment, like she was counting resources. Then she turned and got into a sleek, dark SUV that pulled away from the curb. The world tilted. The sounds of the scene, the radios, the voices, the idling engines faded into a dull roar. Crow stumbled back a step, bumping into the fender of a patrol car. "You okay, Vince?" the deputy asked. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Crow couldn't answer. He just shook his head and pushed his way back to his own cruiser. He slammed the door shut, the sudden silence inside the car deafening. His hands were shaking. He gripped the steering wheel to steady them. Assistant director. He fumbled for the computer terminal mounted in his car. His fingers, thick and clumsy, pecked at the keys. He pulled up the statewide law enforcement bulletin system. There, in the updates about the Davies arrest, was the formal notification. Asterisk case led by Assistant Director Elena Cortez, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Public Corruption Unit. Asterisk, a grainy, official photo was attached to the bulletin. It was her. The same steady eyes, the same calm, unreadable face. Cortez. Elena Cortez. He had pointed a gun at a senior FBI agent. He had tried to extort her for $500. He had called her Chica. A wave of pure animal panic washed over him, so strong he thought he might be sick. His entire life, his entire corrupt little kingdom, flashed before his eyes. The protection money from the struggling shops, the kickbacks from the tow truck company, the evidence he'd planted, the reports he'd falsified, the cozy understanding with Davies. It was a house of cards, and he had just tried to bully a hurricane. No, 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 he muttered to himself, a cold sweat breaking out on his forehead. She didn't recognize me. It was dark. She was scared. She won't say anything. But the memory of her eyes in the parking lot told him that was a lie. She hadn't been scared. Not for a second. He had to cover his tracks. Right now. He pulled up the digital log from his patrol car system. It automatically recorded his location and status. There was an entry for his stop near Maggie's diner. He selected it, his finger hovering over the delete function. It was against every protocol. But protocol wasn't going to save him from a federal prison cell. He erased the entry. As far as the digital record was concerned, he'd been on routine patrol elsewhere. But the human record? Maggie had seen him. The woman Cortez had seen him. He couldn't erase them. For the rest of his shift, Crow was a ghost. He drove around, but he saw nothing. Every car that passed him could be an unmarked FBI vehicle. Every person on the street could be an undercover agent watching him. The paranoia was a physical weight on his chest. Meanwhile, across town in a quiet rented house, Elena Cortez sat at a small kitchen table. The official bustle of the arrest was behind her. The silence of the house pressed in again, but now her mind was occupied with a different puzzle. She opened her personal laptop, not her official FBI one. On the screen was a simple text file with the notes she'd made after the diner. Brooksville PD, Detective Vince Crow, badge number 1874. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. She accessed databases, not with a formal query that would leave a trace, but through back channels, using methods she knew from a career of hunting the worst of the worst. She started with his name and badge number. First, his personnel file. 22 years on the force. A dozen citizen complaints. Internal investigations for excessive force, for conduct unbecoming. All of them dismissed, ruled unfounded, or insufficient evidence. A pattern. The pattern of a man who is either very unlucky or very protected. Then, property records. He owned his home, a 3-bedroom in a decent part of town. But he also owned a lake cabin an hour away. A quick search showed the cabin wasn't inherited. He'd bought it outright 5 years ago. She pulled up his tax returns, what was publicly accessible. His salary as a detective was decent for Brooksville, but not lake cabin. New truck every 3 years decent. The math didn't add up. The gap between his income and his lifestyle was a screaming red flag. Next, she mapped his known associates. She cross-referenced names from his files with businesses in Brooksville. A towing company that had all the city contracts. A bar that never seemed to get cited for health violations. A few struggling immigrant-owned shops in a run-down strip mall. A picture began to form. It was an ugly, familiar picture. A bully with a badge, feeding on a dying town. He saw vulnerability as an opportunity. He saw her that day as just another opportunity. Elena leaned back in her chair, her coffee gone cold. The personal insult of it, the violation, was there. But it was now secondary. This was what she did. She followed corruption, and it had just slithered out from under a rock and pointed a gun at her. This wasn't about revenge. It was about pattern and practice. Detective Crow wasn't just a bad apple. He was a symptom of the very disease she had come to this county to treat, the disease that had ultimately ensnared Commissioner Davies. Crow was a smaller predator, but he was part of the same rotten ecosystem. She wouldn't move yet. A direct confrontation would make him defensive, make him hide evidence. He was scared now. She had seen the dawning terror in his eyes at the courthouse before he looked away. A scared animal was a dangerous animal, but also a stupid one. She would let him sweat. She would continue her official work on the Davies case, which gave her a perfect reason to be in Brooksville. And she would watch. She would dig deeper. She would find the money trail, the victims, the whole sordid network. On her screen, she created a new folder. She labeled it simply Brooksville PD Crow. The hunt for Elena Cortez was the only thing that truly quieted the grief. And now she had 2 hunts. One official, one personal. And they were starting to look like the same thing. The next few days in Brooksville passed with a strange, tense quiet. For Detective Crow, it was like living inside a drum, waiting for the next beat to fall. Every ring of his phone was a heart attack. Every email notification made his stomach clench. He walked through the precinct like a man covered in invisible paint, expecting someone to point and shout his guilt. But nothing happened. The FBI didn't come for him. His chief didn't call him into the office. Life went on. This silence, instead of calming him, made the fear worse. It felt like the calm before a storm. He couldn't sleep. He'd lie awake, the image of the gun in his hand pointed at that calm face, burning behind his eyelids. He started going over his life, his crimes, like a man checking for termites in a rotten house. He called his usual contacts, the tow truck owner, the guy who ran the bar. He told them, in a voice he tried to make sound tough, that things were hot, to lay low. to not call him, but the paranoia had a new focus now. The woman, Elena Cortez. He became obsessed with knowing where she was. He'd drive past the small, neat house on the edge of town she was renting, slowing down to a crawl, peering at the windows. Sometimes he'd see a light on. Once, he saw her through the kitchen window, just sitting at a table, looking at a laptop. The normalcy of it was terrifying. He tried to tell himself he had power. He was a detective. He could find things out. He could fight back. He just needed something on her. Something to make her back off, to create a stalemate. One afternoon, his desperation tipped into action. He saw her leave the house, getting into her blue sedan and driving toward the highway, probably heading to the federal field office in the next county. This was his chance. He waited 10 minutes, then pulled into her driveway. He wore gloves, his heart hammering so loud he was sure the neighbors could hear it. He used a small tool from his kit on the simple lock of the back door. It gave way with a soft click. Inside, the house was quiet and clean. It didn't feel lived in. It felt like a temporary camp. He moved quickly, searching for anything: files, notes, a personal diary. He checked drawers, looked under the bed. He found nothing about the FBI, no case files, no reports about him. His hope began to curdle into a sharper fear. She was too careful. Then, in the small living room, on a plain bookshelf, he saw it. A simple wooden frame. It held a photograph of a man in a suit, smiling warmly. He had kind eyes. Next to the photo was a folded American flag in a triangular display case, the kind given to military families. And beside that, a badge. A police detective's badge, but from a big city department. It was a shrine. Crow picked up the photo, his gloved hands trembling. He turned it over. On the back, in elegant handwriting, was a date and 2 words. Always my love, her husband. A cop, a dead cop. A cold, ugly understanding washed over him. This was her weakness. This private grief. This pain she carried in this empty, quiet house. He didn't see tragedy. He saw a lever. A way to apply pressure. If she was disconnected to a memory, she was vulnerable. He could threaten this. He could tarnish this memory. He could make her too scared, too emotionally wrecked, to come after him. It was a monstrous thought, and somewhere deep down, he knew it. But fear had burned away any last scraps of his conscience. He took out his phone and took a quick picture of the shrine. Then he carefully put everything back exactly as it was and slipped out of the house. Elena, meanwhile, was not idle. Her official work on the Davies case gave her the perfect cover. She was a familiar presence in Brooksville now, a woman in a suit asking questions at the courthouse, meeting with local officials. But in the evenings, she pursued her other investigation. She didn't wear a suit for this. She wore jeans and her old hoodie. She became a shadow in the parts of town Crow liked to patrol. She started with the strip mall he seemed to visit too often. She chose a small, family-run grocery store. She waited until the old man who owned it was alone, stocking shelves in the back. "Excuse me," she said softly. In Spanish. The old man turned wary. His eyes were tired. "I don't want trouble," she said, keeping her voice gentle. "I'm not with the police. I'm looking into the detective. The big one, Crow." The man's face closed up immediately. He shook his head and turned back to his cans. "I know nothing. Please, you should go." "He comes here," Elena pressed, not moving. "He asks for money. For protection." The old man froze. He didn't turn around, but his shoulders slumped. It was confirmation enough. "How much?" Elena asked. A long silence. Then, so quiet she almost missed it, he said, 200. "Every month." Or he says he will find problems with my permits, with my nephew's papers. He finally turned, his eyes full of a deep, helpless anger. He is a devil, but he is the law. What can we do? Elena didn't give him empty promises. She just nodded. Thank you. She left a $50 bill on the shelf next to the cans. For your time. She visited a laundromat next, then a hair salon. The stories were the same, only the amounts changed. 300, 150, always cash. Always with a smile that wasn't a smile, and a threat that was always understood. She collected names, dates, amounts in a small notebook. She was building a map of his corruption, street by street, victim by victim. She knew she was being watched. She felt it. Once, as she left the laundromat, she saw his cruiser parked a block away, the sun glinting off the windshield. She didn't look at it. She just got in her car and drove away, taking a long, winding route back to her rented house. When she got home, she knew immediately. Nothing was out of place. Nothing was taken. But the air in the house felt different, disturbed. She had set little traps in her mind, the angle of the chair, the exact placement of a book on the shelf. They were off just by a hair. He had been inside. She walked slowly to the living room. She stood before the shrine to her husband. Her heart, which had been a steady, professional drumbeat all day, clenched into a hard, painful knot. She touched the edge of the photograph, her finger tracing the smiling face behind the glass. This was no longer just about corruption. He had violated this sacred, private space. He had looked upon her deepest wound with his dirty, greedy eyes. A cold fury, purer and more focused than any she had ever felt, settled in her chest. It wasn't a hot anger. It was a glacial, determined rage. 2 days later, the confrontation she knew was coming arrived. She was at the town's small post office, checking a PO box she'd rented for this purpose, a way to get information from victims without leading anyone to her door. As she walked back to her car in the gravel lot, his cruiser pulled in, blocking her path. Crow got out. He looked terrible pale, with dark circles under his eyes. But his face was set in a mean, desperate mask. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low. "We have nothing to talk about, Detective," Elena said, not breaking her stride. He stepped in front of her. "I think we do." He pulled out his phone, swiped, and held it up. It was the photo he'd taken of her husband's shrine. "Nice little memorial you got there." "Very touching." Elena stopped. The world seemed to narrow to the phone screen and his smug, frightened face. The cold fury inside her turned to ice. "A dead hero," Crow sneered, leaning closer. The smell of stale coffee and nervous sweat was on him. "Must be hard. Must make you want to be careful. Would be a shame if something happened to it. If people started saying things about him. If his nice, clean memory got all muddy. I know a lot of people. I can make things messy." He was trying to sound powerful, but his eyes were darting, scared. He was a cornered rat, showing its teeth. Elena looked from the phone to his eyes. For the first time, she let him see a fraction of what was behind her own calm mask. Not grief, not fear, but a promise of absolute professional ruin. "You listen to me," she said, her voice so quiet he had to strain to hear it. It was the voice she used to talk to the most dangerous criminals in interrogation rooms. "You have already made the single biggest mistake of your pathetic life. You think that," she nodded at the phone, "is a weakness? It's the reason I do what I do. It's the fuel. And you just poured gasoline on it." She took a step forward, and he, the big bullying detective, actually took a step back. "You're scared," she stated, a simple fact. "You're sweating. You're not sleeping. You can feel it ending. This little empire of fear you built in this sad little town. She smiled then, a thin, cold curve of her lips that held no warmth at all. Good, you should be scared. She walked around him, got into her car, and drove away, leaving him standing alone in the dusty lot, clutching his phone. The ghost of her words hanging in the air. In that moment, Detective Crow knew, with a certainty that sank to his bones, that he had lost. He had tried to threaten a force of nature with a picture in a frame, and he had only succeeded in making her angrier, sharper, more determined. He had signed his own warrant. He just didn't know when she would choose to serve it. The pressure on Detective Crow was no longer just in his head. It was a physical vice, tightening from all sides. His partners in corruption, the tow truck boss and the bar owner, were getting nervous. The arrest of Commissioner Davies had sent shockwaves through the town's dirty underbelly. They weren't sophisticated criminals. They were small-time bullies who had enjoyed protection. And now the protection was crumbling. A meeting was called in the back room of the bar, the air thick with cigar smoke and fear. "This is getting hot." "Vince," the tow truck man said, his fingers drumming on the sticky table. "The feds are everywhere. They pulled my books yesterday. Just a routine check," they said. "Routine. My lawyer is having a heart attack." The bar owner nodded, his face greasy with sweat. "Davies is singing like a canary, everyone says. He's going to give up everyone to save his own skin. We need to be smart. We need to cool everything off. No more collections for a while." Crow felt their eyes on him, waiting for him to be the tough cop, to tell them it was all under control. But he couldn't. The memory of Elena Cortez's icy promise in the post office lot was louder than their whining. "Cooling off is fine," Crow grumbled, trying to sound authoritative. "But we've got bills. The last big collection from the warehouses is still out. We need that money. It's clean from the storage guys. They've been paying for years, no problems." It was true. On the edge of town, near the old railroad tracks, were a series of low, anonymous warehouses. They stored everything from surplus furniture to questionable imports. The owners, wanting no trouble with zoning or police inspections, paid a hefty sum every quarter. It was Crow's biggest, most reliable score. It was due this week. "We can't go," the bar owner whispered, panicked. "You go. You're the cop. It looks normal if you're there. You collect, we split it later, and then we go quiet for 6 months. A year." Crow didn't want to go. Every instinct screamed at him to hide. But he needed the money. More than that, he needed to show these men he was still in charge, that he wasn't broken. He gave a stiff nod. "Fine, I'll handle it." Elena, piecing together the financial puzzle of Crow's life, had zeroed in on the warehouse district. His bank records, which she had accessed through means she would never admit in court, showed curious, regular deposits. They didn't match his salary schedule. They came every quarter, like clockwork, always in cash, always just after he had taken a personal day. The pattern was obvious. The last such deposit had been 3 months ago. The next was due. She knew he was desperate, backed into a corner. A desperate man would cling to his biggest source of dirty money. He would go for the warehouse collection. It was the only move he had left. She could have brought in a full team, surrounded the area, and taken him down when he showed up. But that felt too impersonal. It also risked him seeing the net closing and running. She needed him to make the mistake himself, to give her everything on a platter. And after his violation of her home, after his threat against her husband's memory, she wanted to look him in the eye when the cage door slammed shut. She devised a different plan. A simpler one. A personal one. The night of the expected collection was cold and clear. The warehouse district was a ghost town after dark. Just long shadows from tall security lights and the hum of distant highway traffic. Elena arrived early. She parked her blue sedan in the lot of a long-closed packaging plant, a place with a clear view of the main warehouse entrance Crow used. She wasn't wearing her suit. She wore dark jeans, the gray hoodie, clothes he would recognize. She looked, once again, like the woman he had first approached in the diner. It was the bait dot. She didn't have to wait long. His cruiser, lights off, rolled slowly into the warehouse lot and stopped. He sat there for a long time, just watching. Paranoia had made him cautious. Finally, he got out, his bulky figure unmistakable under the harsh white light. He walked to a side door of the main warehouse and knocked. A small window slid open, then closed. A moment later, a thick envelope was passed out. Crow took it, tapped it against his palm, and shoved it into the inside pocket of his jacket. The whole exchange took less than a minute. He turned, a look of grim satisfaction on his face, and started walking back to his car. That's when he saw her. Elena stepped out from between two buildings into the pool of light. She stood there, hands in her hoodie pockets, perfectly still. Crow froze. His eyes widened, then narrowed in confusion and dawning anger. What was she doing here? Was she following him? Was this a coincidence? His brain, fogged by fear and greed, couldn't make sense of it. All he saw was the woman who was ruining his life, standing alone in a deserted lot. A wild, stupid hope flickered in his chest. Maybe he could fix this. Maybe he could scare her off for good. Maybe he could even make her disappear. The darkness and the isolation whispered the terrible idea to him. He changed direction, walking toward her, his steps heavy on the asphalt. You, he spat out as he got closer. You just can't leave it alone, can you? Elena said nothing. She just watched him come. He stopped a few feet from her, his chest heaving. I have the money, he said, patting his jacket pocket, as if that explained everything. It's over. You take your federal paycheck and you get out of my town. You forget you ever saw me. Or else what, detective? Elena asked, her voice calm in the vast, quiet night. You'll point your gun at me again? The mention of the gun, the directness of it, broke the last of his control. The image of her in his sights, of that terrifying calm, flooded back. His hand went to his holster. This time, it wasn't a panic move. It was a decision. A terrible, final decision. He drew his service weapon, leveling it at her center mass, just like in the diner parking lot. The scene was a sick replay. Yeah, he hissed, the gun steady in his hand. Maybe I will. Maybe I'll say you attacked me. Maybe you're working with the warehouse criminals. Who are they gonna believe? A dead Fed or a local detective? He was committed now, the words pouring out, painting the story he would tell. He took a step closer, the barrel of the gun unwavering. You should have been scared the first time. You should have just paid the $500. This was it. The whole ugly pattern, repeated and confirmed. The extortion, the threat, the lethal abuse of power. All of it captured. Elena didn't look at the gun. She looked past his shoulder, into the darkness, and gave a single small nod. A voice, amplified and thunderous, exploded from the shadows of the surrounding buildings. Asterisk, asterisk, federal agents. Drop your weapon, detective. Do IT now. Asterisk, asterisk, bright, blinding spotlights snapped on from 3 directions, pinning Crow in a cone of white light. He flinched like a stabbed animal, his head whipping around. From behind shipping containers, from the roofs of low buildings, black-clad figures emerged, rifles trained on him. The quiet lot was now alive with movement and shouted commands. Drop the weapon. On the ground. Now. The envelope of cash fell from Crow's jacket, fluttering to the asphalt. The gun in his hand, which had felt like power a second ago, now felt like a burning piece of evidence. His finger was still on the trigger guard. His arm began to shake. He looked back at Elena, his face a mask of shattered understanding. She hadn't moved. In the blinding light, he could see her expression clearly. No fear, no triumph. Just a cool final assessment. She slowly raised her left hand, and with her right, reached into her hoodie pocket. She pulled out her credentials, flipping them open. The gold badge of the FBI gleamed under the spotlights. "You're under arrest, Detective Crow," she said, her voice cutting through the amplified echoes. "For attempted extortion, bribery, civil rights violations, brandishing a firearm, and conspiracy under color of law." She took a step forward, now just an agent reading a suspect his fate. "You have the right to remain silent." The rest of the words blurred into a roaring in Crow's ears. The world shrank to the feel of the gun in his numb hand, the sight of the FBI badge, and the cold, unwavering eyes of the woman he had been stupid enough to call Chica. The weapon clattered to the ground. He didn't even remember letting it go. He sank to his knees, the fight utterly gone. As agents rushed in to cuff him, Elena watched, the cold fury in her chest finally easing. It was done. The interrogation room of the federal building was a world away from the dusty streets of Brooksville. It was cool, silent, and smelled of antiseptic and stale coffee. The walls were a dull gray, and a single, bright light shone down on the metal table where Detective Crow sat, his hands cuffed in front of him. The bulky, intimidating man from the diner was gone. In his place was a shrunken figure, his uniform shirt wrinkled, his eyes hollow. He stared at the mirrored wall, knowing people were watching, but too exhausted to care. The door clicked open. Elena Cortez walked in, followed by another agent, a younger man with a serious face who carried a thick file. Elena didn't sit. She placed a digital recorder on the table, turned it on with a precise click, and stated the date, time, and present individuals. Her voice was clean, professional, devoid of any personal feeling. She laid 2 photographs on the table in front of Crow. One was a still image from the diner's security camera, showing him sliding into her booth. The other was a crisp, high-definition photo taken by the FBI surveillance team minutes ago, showing him pointing his gun at her in the warehouse lot. From the beginning to the end. "Detective," she said, her tone matter-of-fact. "A perfect circle." Crow didn't look at the photos. He kept staring at the table. "I want a lawyer," he mumbled, the words sounding weak even to him. "You're entitled to one." Elena nodded. "You can call one right now. But before you do, I want you to understand exactly what you're facing." She opened the file the younger agent had brought. She didn't read from it. She knew it by heart. "We have the financial records. The lake cabin, the truck payments, the cash deposits that match the complaints from 17 separate business owners in Brooksville. We have signed statements from the owners of the grocery store, the laundromat, the hair salon, the hardware store. They're all prepared to testify. We have the warehouse manager on tape describing his quarterly fee to you for the last 8 years." She placed another sheet of paper down. It was a network chart, with Crow's name in the middle, lines connecting him to the tow truck company, the bar, the warehouse, and a dotted line leading to the now convicted Commissioner Davies. "This is a RICO conspiracy charge," she said, tapping the paper. "The Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. It carries a minimum of 20 years. Then we layer on the civil rights violations for your little protection racket. Then the attempted extortion of a federal officer. And finally," she leaned forward slightly, her eyes finally locking onto his, "the brandishing of a firearm. Twice. a second time with multiple federal agents as witnesses. That by itself could put you away for a decade. The weight of the words pressed Crow down into his chair. 20 years. 30. His life was over. He'd be an old man when he got out, if he ever got out. He saw his future in the sterile gray walls of a prison cell. You? You set me up, he whispered, a last flicker of defiance. No, Elena corrected, her voice still calm. You set yourself up. I just gave you the opportunity to show a federal judge and jury exactly who you are. You chose to pull that gun. Again. She let the silence hang in the room, letting the hopelessness seep into him. Then she changed her tone. It became quieter, almost conversational. There is one path that doesn't end with you dying in a federal penitentiary. Detective Crow. He looked up, a faint, desperate hope in his eyes. You know the system, she said. You've been a part of it. The corruption in Brooksville didn't start and end with you. It couldn't have. Who looked the other way on your internal investigations? Who enjoyed the steaks and the bottles of scotch that your dirty money bought? Who else was on Commissioner Davies's payroll? She was offering him a deal, a way out. But it was a trapdoor that led into a different kind of hell. You give us everything, she said. Names, dates, amounts. Meetings, understandings. You wear a wire if we need it. You testify in front of a grand jury, and then a trial. Full, complete cooperation. You help us clean out the entire infected wound that is Brooksville's power structure. The younger agent slid a single sheet of paper across the table. It was a plea agreement. The charges listed were still serious, but the recommended sentence was circled. A range of 5 to 7 years, with the possibility of parole sooner. 5 years, Crow breathed, looking at the number like it was a mirage. Or 30, the younger agent said, his first words. His voice was firm. Crow's mind raced. He thought of his so-called partners, the bar owner who had pushed him to go to the warehouse, the tow truck boss who would sell him out in a second to save his own skin. He thought of the police chief who had taken his envelopes of cash and given him a promotion. They weren't friends. They were users, just like he was. A bitter survivalist clarity washed over him. He looked at Elena. She was waiting, her expression unreadable. He thought of the shrine in her house, the photo of her husband. He had tried to use that as a weapon. And now she was using the entire weight of the United States government to dismantle his life. There was no fighting her. There was only surviving her. His shoulders slumped, the last of the fight leaving his body. He gave a slow, heavy nod. I'll talk, he said, the words tasting like ash. I'll tell you everything. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The following weeks were a whirlwind in Brooksville. It started with the sudden early retirement of the police chief. Then came the arrests of the bar owner and the tow truck company boss. A city council member was indicted for bribery. The local paper ran headlines bigger than when the factory had closed. The town, which had felt so heavy and silent under the weight of its own corruption, seemed to let out a collective, shocked breath. Elena stayed to oversee the initial cleanup. Her work was done in conference rooms and courthouses now. One afternoon, she took a final walk through the town. She passed Maggie's diner. Through the window, she saw the old booth where it had all begun. Maggie was inside, wiping the counter. She saw Elena, paused, and then gave her a firm, grateful nod. Elena returned it. She stopped in front of the Brooksville Police Department. The building looked different. The feeling of a fortress for bullies was gone. The new interim chief was a younger officer, one whose name had never appeared on Crow's network chart. He was standing outside, talking in easy, fluent Spanish to a family who had come to report a minor theft. He was listening, really listening, and taking notes. The father of the family was talking with his hands, explaining. The mother held a small child on her hip. They weren't nervous. They weren't looking at the ground. They were speaking to an officer who was there to serve, not to take. Elena watched from across the street. The cold, focused anger that had driven her for weeks had finally melted away. In its place was a quiet, deep exhaustion, and underneath that, a fragile sense of something that felt like peace. This was why she did it. This small moment. It wasn't about vengeance for a personal insult. It was about making space for this, for a family to talk to a cop without fear. It was what her husband had believed in. It was the world he had tried to build. One good deed at a time. A small, real smile touched her lips. It was tired, and it was sad, but it was genuine. The work here was finished. She turned and walked back to her car. The blue sedan seemed older now, a relic from a different chapter. She got in, started the engine, and took one last look at the town in her rearview mirror. Then she pulled onto the highway, heading east toward home. The grief for her husband was still there, a permanent part of her now, but it no longer felt like a roaring silence. It felt like a companion, and today it felt quiet,